Bonjour, désolé du retard. Alors, on est réunis aujourd'hui pour une présentation sur la bande dessinée canadienne, on Canadian Comics. On a trois présentateurs. Dans l'ordre, ce seront Chris Reyns-Chikuma, ensuite Sylvain Rheault et ensuite Darren Prèfontaine. Les rencontres de la Société canadienne d'études de la BD se déroulent cette année dans un espace virtuel. On se voit par nos petites images. L'espace est un enjeu et la Société canadienne d'études de la bande dessinée organise ses activités à la fois sur des terres non cédées et des terres pour lesquelles il y a eu des traités avec les nombreux peuples autochtones qui forment des nations distinctes sur l'île de la Tortue. While this year we are coming together from all across Canada and the world, we would like to acknowledge that our organization operates from both treaty lands and the unceded territories of the Indigenous peoples of multiple and distinct nations across Turtle Island. La première personne qui prendra la parole, c'est Chris Reyns. Il enseigne à l'Université de l'Alberta en langue. Il fait de la recherche sur la bande dessinée depuis 15 ans. Et dans les 5 dernières années, a concentré une partie des énergies sur la bande dessinée canadienne, notamment avec une équipe dont on a des chercheurs ici présents aujourd'hui, un projet qui s'appelle Au-delà des deux solitudes. So this project is called Beyond the Two Solitudes, and he will be presenting this to us in half a second. Chris, to
Whoa,
you.
half a second. How short. Thank you, Jean. Yes, so I'm going to share a document with you. So here it is. It's a PowerPoint right away. So here's the first slide. So bridging divides, bâtir des passerelles, deux solitudes, two solitudes in Canadian comics in BD Canadienne. So yeah, we are like today 3 people. Sylvain Lemay was supposed to present also today, but he couldn't make it for personal reasons. So we're going to have 3 presentations only. What I'm going to do is to present the project that we're working on as a kind of a big team. I mean, a team that is becoming bigger, fortunately, of researchers specialized or specializing in Canadian comics and bande dessinée canadienne. And the project is, as it was, I mean, said by Jean, is called Beyond the Two Solitudes. So it implies that we are not satisfied with the non-dialogue between the two solitudes. So we're looking for, I mean, we're trying to reinforce it, but also we try, of course, to add other solitudes that were dismissed before or ignored, and especially, of course, the Indigenous one. And that's what we're going to do just after my presentation, actually. So you have a website where we try to gather our information, and here you have the address of the website. I'm not going to show it because we don't have much time. We started that project actually 6 years ago, a long time ago, with the first publication on Canadian comics in the comparative review of the Canadian Review of Comparative Literature. We had the first special issue on that topic. It was interrupted several times for several reasons, but continued slowly, kind of underground a little bit. And then we restarted the project full speed, I mean, last year. So as I said, there is a website. We now more than 10 researchers. 2 are here with me now, Sylvain and Jean, and then Daniel Marron is going to present a bit later, and then you have others such as Jocelyn and Mira and Jean-Paul and others. We did already some conferences, obviously, in the last 6 years. Individually, we presented papers on that topic, but most of the time separately. And we did it for the first time in kind of in a group, either in seminars or panels or in conferences. but this one obviously. The second one, actually the first one was in April 2021 at the Conference of Comparative Literature. There was 9 presentations, 9 papers, all focused on Canadian comics. And out of this, we're going to have a publication coming out, a second special issue in the Canadian Review of Comparative Literature. And then we already preparing another one for next year in Taiwan. Then we have, we're preparing another conference also only on Canadian comics and Bande Dessinée Canadienne. It will take place in Montreal in mid-June. And then we're going to mix scholars, Canadian publishers, and artists. We will launch the call for papers soon, probably by the end of the month. But I wanted to introduce the topic right now. Plenty of publications on the topic. Before we started, there were a couple of them already, although not many. And then we have now, as I said, group publications, which like special issues or books. There are already, as you know, 2 books published just after the special issue of the review, Canadian Review of Comparative Literature in 2016 and 2018. But it's quite very limited. We have a second issue coming out, as I said, of that same comparative literature review, but also we have another one. We just launched the call for papers that will be published in 2022 in the journal called Voix Plurielle. It will be co-edited by myself, Jean, and Jocelyn. So you can see a lot of things going on. We're still having our own publications individually, of course, that are not necessarily published all together. I myself published 2 articles recently, one on the influence of manga in Canadian comics and bande dessinée, and comparing both and showing how different it is, the way it's received in both worlds. It's going to come out at the end of June in the Comics Grid. Another one that I just sent and was accepted on the newspaper on drone pictures in a newspaper, a French-speaking newspaper called La Survivance. So it's a Franco-Albertan newspaper. It's coming out in December with the CEFCO. My colleagues also are publishing other articles. Sylvain is going to present tomorrow, I think, on Rabaliati and Doucet, the reception of these 2 authors in Anglo-Canada. And finally, we're going to have a big exhibition, and I say big, really, it's going to be big. It's the whole museum is going to be, occupied by that exhibition. It was supposed to take place in June this year, but because of COVID, we had to postpone it. And it's now for sure going to take place between June and October. So from June to October 22. The title is Comic Sans. I don't know if my pronunciation in English is correct, if it's Comic Sans, but you understand what it is. 12 Canadian comics artists. So you have artists like Yagulanas, Rabaliati, Daliwal, Hochi Anderson, Chudolinska, Julie Delporte, and more. So that's it. So you can see that we're trying to be active. And if I'm presenting this right now, it's because I'm trying to recruit some of you to be part of that group. And hopefully it's going to work. Thank you very much. And now it's Darren and Sylvain. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. So, on va avoir la discussion peut-être après les 3 présentations pour se faire une idée d'ensemble. So we'll take questions after we have the 3 presentations so that we can have, pictures from different angles. Our next speaker, notre prochain présentateur est Sylvain Rheault. Il est professeur à l'Université de Regina depuis 1998. Ses recherches portent sur la littérature française du 20e siècle, la rhétorique, la stylistique, ainsi que la bande dessinée de toutes les cultures. Son livre le plus récent avec Philip Mather est Rediscovering French Science Fiction. Et puis Sylvain est l'un des fondateurs de la société où nous sommes maintenant. Il en a été le premier président. Donc Sylvain.
I forgot to turn on my microphone, sorry about that. So with Sylvain Lemay today, we're supposed to tackle all aspects of Canadian comics. But since he couldn't make it, I'm going to focus on Indigenous comics. And basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of set up the field for Darren Prèfontaine afterward to talk about his own project. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to be talking about Indigenous population in Canada, the linguistic choices that are offered to them, and how the format, production, and distributions are affected by these choices. So these are numbers that I've taken from CSSC Canada, and all of them are mostly from 2016. So as you can see, the Indigenous population is about 1.67 million at that time, and out of 36 million people in Canada. And it's also interesting to note that the percentage is increasing over time. So this is very good news. And just for reference, the percentage of francophones in 2008 was 22%. Now, in 2016, about 260,000 Indigenous people said they could speak a Indigenous language. So as we seen previously that there was about 1.6 million Indigenous people, but only 260,000 can speak a Indigenous language. And also there's over 70 Indigenous languages on the territory, and forming 12 language families. So I'm not going to name them all, but here they are. And to give you here a better perspective of what this represents, so here you have some of the some numbers for some of the languages. So how many people among them can speak this language? So for example, for the Algonquin languages, it's 175,000. So that's the largest group. And then you have Cree, 96,000, and so on. And then you have smaller and smaller groups for a total of 260,000. So so language is there's not many people still in Canada who can speak Indigenous languages. That's an important thing to consider. So this leads to what linguistic choices you have. You can, if you are a Indigenous creator, choose to publish in an Indigenous language, and that's what, for example, Ilonka K. Harris did. Here, this is one of her the first book you see here is one of her work, and she does graphic novels using small puppets. So she sets up like a decor, and then she puts her puppet into the decor, and she moves the puppet and takes pictures. So that's the way she creates graphic novels. You can have a bilingual comic, in which both languages will be simultaneous, like Dakwakada Warriors, in which many words from I forgot the nation, Tushton, I think, are used with English syntax. Also, you can have bilingual and alternance, and that's, for example, the project of Stories of Our People that we're going to talk about later. Or you can have choose like one of the other two languages in Canada, so either English, like Red, or French. And here's an example of J'aime les filles by author Obama. Now I'm sorry for the mess in the next slide, but so this leads to other further choices. So after you choose, for example, as an Indigenous author, how you're going to, what language you're going to choose for your production. So yeah, after that you have to choose your format. So you can have either paper format, electronic format, or both. Now for if you choose paper format, then of course you'll need distribution. So you'll have to find a distributor that can actually distribute your physical book. You could choose electronic version, and then that solves kind of that problem. And it's the case, for example, for here Ilankaka Harris, so Nighthawk and Little Elk. Her story has been translated in different languages, and she shows electronic versions for that. So what she did, she first created her story in her own language, and then she had it translated in English. And then using the internet, she found collaborators who could create further translations. So I don't know how many translations there are right now, but I know there's an Arabic version, a German version, Inuit version, and so on. So the electronic versions allows for greater flexibility in terms of languages. And so then this kind of book can be used for language revival. So you have a story that is created in a specific Indigenous language that can be used as class material, or it can be used like for other purposes as well. And this one here, Christian story, I forgot. Sorry. Oh, I forgot the name of the other. It's on the cover, but it's too small for me to read. But I remember he's from the Anishinaabe First Nation, and he decided to create a story. And then, as you know, you can publish your book on Amazon for free. If you sell your book, Amazon will get a commission. But basically, you can create a story for free. So that's what he did. So if you go on Amazon, you can find a Kindle version of this story. So this gives lots of new opportunities for creators. And of course, you can have both versions. So you can have you can decide to publish in both paper and electronic format. In this case, for example, Path of the Warrior. But I'm going to talk a little longer about this one when we talk about production. Now, in regards to productions, so how do you find the money to publish your creation? So, of course, you could self-publish, so that's a publication, and that's, for example, what Jason Eagle Speaker did for On Education. All his books are self-published, and what he does is he uses Amazon to distribute his book. This one here, Residential School, On Education, Residential School Graphic Novels, was published with over 100,000 copies. He said that he got orders even from Germany for this book, and it described what residential school people had to go through. There's two versions. There's one censored and one uncensored. So the uncut version has a story about sexual abuse, which is not present in the other one. So it's for two different purposes. Next, For production, you can have funding or subvention. And that's the case for Path of the Warrior. So this is a production from what used to be known as Healthy Aboriginal Network, and it's now Indigenous Indigenous Story Studio, I think. And basically, he was starting with projects for specific clientele. So, for example, there was a group in Canada who needed some material to talk about drug use or foster care or anything that would be related to First Nations. So he would get a grant to produce his book and contact Indigenous authors, both illustrators and writers, and then produce the book and then offer as well an electronic version. So that allowed him to create a kind of a big collection for his studio. Then there's crowdfunding. So many of you probably heard about Moonshot. That was so that's a new collection created with crowdfunding. As you can see, the modern technology offers lots of new resources, and Indigenous creators are using those resources for good effect. And finally, you can publish through a normal publisher. So Amazon did some. For example, there's a collection of books on famous Indigenous people, like they could be artists or leaders, at Highwater Press, based in Winnipeg. And these books are mostly geared towards a public of school children. So that's for production, and then distribution. So you can either use kind of a network to distribute your books. So, for example, the books published by the Indigenous Studio, because they are created for specific publics, so they are distributed through these networks. So they could be like social workers or so on. So that's one way to distribute their books. Or they can be produced for bookstores, just like the books from Highwater Press. So you can find these books in most bookstores like Indigo or Coles and so on. And finally, you could simply distribute your book through Amazon, and that's probably the easiest way for many creators. So as you can see, each of these productions here had to make choices in regards to format, production, and distribution. And this leads us to stories of our people. So I did not talk much about this because we have in our next presentation the editor of the book. We're going to talk a little more about this. Thank you for your attention.
Merci Sylvain, thank you. Et donc, notre troisième présentateur, Darren Prèfontaine, est chercheur et auteur à l'Institut Gabriel Dumont, a Saskatchewan-based Métis educational and cultural institution. Since 1997, he has helped develop dozens of Métis-specific resources, many of which have won numerous book awards. He has also worked on cultural projects, one of them the Virtual Museum of Métis History. He has a book called Gabriel Dumont, Les Chefs Michifs in Images and Words, which won the Book of the Year in 2011 in Saskatchewan. I'm leaving it to you, Darren.
Merci Jean-Sébastien. Merci Sylvain. J'offre les mots en français, ma langue ancestrale, mais je suis un anglophone. I will present in English. Mon père était canadien-français, mais ma mère était un anglophone. Et parce que ça, je suis un anglophone. So for comprehension, I will speak in English, although I must admit it is nice to hear French, and it's nice to hear my family name pronounced Prèfontaine. I don't often. In Saskatchewan, I get Prèfontaine or Prèfontaine. So always nice to hear it the way it's supposed to be said. So merci tous. I work at Gabriel Dumont Institute, as Jean had mentioned, and I've been there for quite a while. And I'm a settler, so my ancestry is not Métis, although I've become very acculturated towards the Métis, and I very much appreciate working with the Métis community. If it wasn't for our community people, there would be no Gabriel Dumont Institute. So that is where the genius of this idea to create this graphic novel anthology came from. It came from the community, because so many wonderful stories and people have shared with us over the years. And we collected all these wonderful oral histories with this rich folklore, a tradition that blends Algonquian attributes such as Wisakichak and Nanabush, the tricksters, with an old Canadian style, like loups-garous become loups-garous, le diable becomes le diable to the Michif. So a lot of things that were Canadian and Anishinabeg and the Nehewak blend together in a stew to create a Michif stew. As someone who's a descendant of a Canadian or a Cree or an Ojibwe, you would recognize elements in each of them in the Michif stories, but the Michif stories take on new meanings, and they tell tales in a way that Michif people understand. And part of the reason why we wanted to do this is to show where the Métis ancestral cultures came from, but we wanted to show where they've diverged and become Métis and became Michif. And by Michif, I'm speaking of the Métis-made language. Michif is a mix of French nouns and Cree verbs and verb phrases. It's a uniquely Canadian language made in Canada, and it was made by the Métis, and it's a world-renowned language. Unfortunately, it's imperiled, and the language that we generally serve to promote the most is called Michif or Michif Cree or Heritage Michif. It's the mix between the two, and there might be anywhere between 250 to 1,000 speakers left. So our emphasis is on Michif language preservation, which leads us to the graphic novel. We collected all these stories over the years, but we wanted to present them in a way to reach different people. Some people like hearing stories because we work in an oral culture. So we have to respect the elders, les vieux and Michif, as they're known. So we wanted to produce a resource that would keep their voice, but we also wanted to reach people in new ways. I'm fortunate that I work in a place where we're allowed flexibility, and I work in a place where I work with other people who appreciate comics. So I floated the idea of creating a Métis graphic novel based on the traditional oral stories of the Métis, the Michif people. And it went over well with my colleagues. So what we wanted to do is work with the elders to get the stories done right, to visit with them and to follow all the proper protocols, which we did. And then we wanted to translate those stories into a narrative that other people understand. The thing about traditional stories, they don't really fit a clean linear narrative. So we wanted to do something that would allow different audiences with different ways of looking at stories, understand and appreciate stories. So what we did is we put together a graphic novel that had the original stories of the elders. These were the stories like Wisakichak, Nanabush, or Tijan stories. Tijan is based on the old Canadian trickster Tijan, and he becomes Michif, so he's like the Algonquin tricksters Wisakichak and Nanabush. Where we take the loups-garous, who's based on the loups-garous, where we would take other things like La Vieille de Carême, the old lady of Lent, and mix them with Pekash, which is a kind of like a Cree cannibal spirit, like, and also with Wisakichak, and take those traditional stories, keep them in the elder's voice, but we wanted to present them in a way different people could appreciate them for different ways of looking at culture. So we had an author take the traditional stories, and she worked with the elders to blend them into stories that had a a more linear narrative that flowed where different audiences could appreciate. And then we took those stories and then we put them together in graphic form. We worked with an artist and we took them and we put them into the graphic form. So the graphic novel we produced was called Stories of Our People, Les Histoires de la Nation Michif, a Métis graphic novel anthology. We published it in 2010. So it had the following components. It had an introduction explaining what Métis oral history and stories are, the blending of the Canadian, the Anishinaabe and the Nehewak cultures into make a Michif culture. And then we had the elders' original stories told in their voice. And then we had the prose reworkings of those stories. And then we had the graphic novel component. So it had 4 parts. And that's how we packaged it. And our intention was to reach people who like comics, people who like traditional stories, people who were looking for it in new ways, and young people in particular, teens and young adults really like the graphic medium. So that was our main audience. And we wanted to reach all Canadians, not just Michif Canadians, Métis Canadians, but all Canadians. We wanted to show how unique and durable Métis culture was. So we decided to go with this format. We found a wonderful illustrator in Carrie Saguenay, and she illustrated the graphic novel in different forms, different styles. And it was quite successful. We printed 2,000 copies in 2010, and we sold out right away, like within 2 years, which in Canada is pretty good. For funding, we actually receive a good chunk of money from the Department of Indigenous and Northern Affairs through a specific fund they provide to the Métis Nation that we access. And that's where most of our publishing money comes from. So we're fortunate in that sense. So that's where the funding for that came from. So in about 3 or 4 years, we finished that. And then what we did is we broke up the stories and then we produced little individual comics. And we sold those for a while, or we gave them away at community events. And I think we had 2 or 3 printings of about maybe 500 or so a piece. And the run completed itself. So what we've done now is we've taken those comics, plus all the introductory stuff, the prose stories, and we put them on our website, the Virtual Museum of Métis History and Culture. And I'm sorry I don't have anything to present, like to show you folks, but if you're interested in looking at the comics or downloading them, you go to www.metismuseum.ca and you look for our stories, and you can download all the comics there. If I could share, I have the website, if I could share that with you. I'm not so used to working with this medium, we use Teams, but I'd gladly share you what it looks like.
I could share an image. Candida Rifkin nicely sent the link, so I could share it from my
Why don't I
screen
send the link?
Well, yeah.
And it's just the index where everything is. So how am I going to do that here?
In the chat.
The chat, voila, thank you. I think I just sent that. So if you could put that up and I can describe them if anyone is interested. But that was the process we followed. So we collected the stories, we reworked them, we created the prose narrative, we illustrated it, we created the graphic novel. Then we released individual comics that we gave away to the community. If we can scroll down, there we go. And these are all the links to the specific graphic novels or comics if you want to download them. There's 4 or 5 stories. Attack of the Rougarou, Chijan and the Red Willows, How Michif Was Lost. And you could just download them from there if you're interested.
Yeah.
And like I said, we went to the comic route and it's been very successful, particularly during the pandemic when a lot of educators wanted resources quickly and accessibly, have easy access to them. These comics have been well used and well appreciated. Teachers have been using them. And schools all across Canada, we get a lot of interest from even in maritime Canada, even in the United States, Montana, North Dakota have a lot of Métis people that are part of the Métis Nation. So there's a lot of interest there as well. In terms of Michif language production, we only used Michif as an accent in the language. We used it very sparingly. very few Métis people understand Michif. When we do our children's books, for instance, we do bilingual English and Michif versions with narration, but we didn't think it would work so well with this graphic novel format. So we chose to only use Michif words for emphasis and spellings, like Michif spellings, phonetic spellings of words like kokum, which is sounds and is spelled differently than it is in Cree, or even merci in Michif, it's marci. It's spelled differently, it's pronounced differently. So we try to honor the elders and the pronunciations in that regard, but the graphic novel itself is almost, and the comics are almost all in English with a little bit of Michif for accent, or to highlight the language rather. I think that's about it. Sylvain, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
Well, Jean has prepared some questions.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to open the floor though. So we had 3 presentations. If people have questions on one of the 3, or questions that link elements of the 3, the floor is open. Well, yeah, Candida Rifkin.
Hi, it's not really I hate to say this, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but it's for Darren. I teach in the English department at the University of Winnipeg with a number of Métis students in every class. And I just want you to know that we use these comics in a university course, but because, you know, we wanted to do some more advanced research, we used some of the oral histories that are recorded on your site and the transcripts, and the students thought about the adaptation of elders telling the story and the way it was written in prose, and then how it became a comic. And I just wanted to suggest that for other people who might be thinking about how to use these comics in a university classroom, they are not only great content in terms of teaching about Michif and Métis culture and traditions and stories, but they're also a really good example of how comics are a different form from prose and from oral storytelling. So I think although it might be more sort of evident that they're good for schools, there's a really good sort of handshake between the different resources you have on your website that I'd encourage other comics teachers to think about using in classrooms to really get students to think about the craft of your comics, because the way that they bring things in from the oral stories, but they also do things unique to comics. And I know I'm always trying to get my students to figure out what makes comics a different form of storytelling from oral history or prose. So I just wanted to thank you for having that whole kind of ecosystem at the Institute website, because you don't just have, you have so many resources there that supplement the comics. And I wanted to just encourage my colleagues to think about using them in universities in that sort of larger cultural teachings kind of way, but also for teaching comics themselves. And thank you for this work. I guess my question is, are there any more likely to come out? Do you think you can get another grant to produce more of them?
Well, thank you for the very kind words, and thank you again to Sylvain and Jean. Sorry for overstepping my bounds. I just got mixed up in when I spoke earlier. So yes, I'm glad you opened it up to everybody. I would love to do another graphic novel. I really would. Unfortunately, I don't think right now it's a priority. We're working on other things, but certainly for the future, it would be. And it was quite an involved process, and I'm very glad you appreciated it. But you articulated exactly what we were looking for. People process information in different ways, and stories have different meanings and different layers. And by presenting it the way we did, we were hoping people would figure that out and see it. And I'm glad that you and your students have seen it that way and appreciate the resources in the Virtual Museum. Down the line, sure, we'd love to do another one, but I think it's probably not going to happen for the next couple of years anyway. But we're always on the lookout for good stories and good authors. Unfortunately, some of our best storytellers have passed on. With each year, all the old people seem to be passing. Like those with firsthand knowledge of the traditional stories are probably in their 70s now. The youngest Michif speaker is probably 67, 68 years old, like fluent. So it's just a time game for us. So maybe that should give us incentive to do more traditional stories in that way. We still have a lot of wonderful elders we work with, but fortunately, some of the good elders that we worked with in the past, like Gilbert Pelche, they've passed on. And who knows what more we could have learned or what he could have shared with the world in that time. But yes, most certainly somewhere down the line. But right now, our emphasis is really on producing as many children's books as we can, and a lot of Michif language retention projects we're working on too. But thank you again.
Andrew Demain.
Hi, I'm struggling to articulate my question, so this is going to sound well inarticulate. When we talk about sort of the Métis people in particular, and we talk about like the lost generation, how do you try to represent what we might package as a Métis experience to a people that have been dispersed to all manners of geography and culture and backgrounds? How do you keep that complexity in the storytelling, I guess is my question. Like, what's the approach to that?
Well, thank you for your question, Andrew. And you're very right, very correct. Métis people have been dispersed. They've been colonized. People are coming back to their culture. It wasn't cool to be Métis for well over 100 years. Colonization, racism made a lot of people deny their heritage. And this is a bit of the background information. People tried to say they were French Canadian or Scottish, or if they could, if they couldn't, they just lived their lives the best they could. But it was unrelentingly racist in this part of the world. The Battle of Batoche really was Western Canada's Plains of Abraham. I use that having French Canadian ancestry, and I knowing exactly what the Plains of Abraham meant to my Canadian ancestors. Well, the Battle of Batoche was the Métis Plains of Abraham. It was total defeat. It was conquest. It was brutal. People were colonized and people denied their heritage. And as a result, people left. People went to the Four Winds, went to the United States, BC, Ontario, and lost their culture. Fortunately, Andrew, a good chunk of people stayed and kept the culture alive. Pockets, strong communities existed like the Qu'Appelle Valley in Saskatchewan, parts of Alberta, parts of Manitoba, North Dakota, Montana. So from those pockets, the culture remained alive. Batoche, the heart of the Métis Nation, remained alive. So what we try to do is we try to work with the traditional people, the storytellers, the keepers of knowledge, les vieux, the old people, and tell the stories and present them in a way that's culturally affirming, in a way that we can reach out to those that have left the Métis Nation. It's not an easy task, but we do our best. And our focus is on the Métis Nation that exists in Western Canada. There's nothing that we do that relates to people who call themselves Métis in Quebec or Atlantic Canada. That's a whole new ball of wax unrelated to what we do. So our focus is on the Métis Nation that was born in Western Canada through the fur trade. So our emphasis is that we keep the history simple, the culture simple, respect for the elders, working with our communities, and letting people know that if it wasn't for the Métis community we serve, we wouldn't exist. So it's about relationship keeping. There's a term called Wakutwayan in Cree and in Michif, which means relations, our relations. We have to work with our community, with our elders, with our community people, our language keepers, our knowledge keepers, and produce the resources. So every Gabriel Dumont Institute resource you see, whether it's our graphic novel we did or a children's book, is a result of a community of people working with us. So it's a community project. We're grounded in the community, and because of that, we produce resources appreciated by the community. And for people who have lost their culture and want to come back to it, we've met many people that have lived in other parts of Canada and the United States who were adopted out and have come to us and shared their story. And we've been able to help them reconnect them with their kin in Western Canada, particularly Saskatchewan. So in our small way, we're helping people reconnect to their heritage and their culture. But thanks mainly through the work of our community. Does that answer your question?
A little bit. So if I can ask a follow-up, I hope I'm not taking too much time here. Like my wife and kids are members of the Métis Nation of Ontario. Yes. And again, lost generation. So there's kind of this schism between like the politics of the Métis Nation, which clearly wants to reconnect the lost generation to their original culture, right? To sort of reunify a people who have been, diversified, as you said, after the Battle of Batoche for, what are we talking about here? 100 and some odd years.
Yes.
So the question is, how do you acknowledge that dispersed experience which is what the shared experience of being Métis is for the last century and a half or so, in ways other than just recreating a very old unity? Or is that something that you even want to undertake or are interested in undertaking? Like it's a very political question to me.
It is, and we're a non-political institution. And all I can say to that is that we represent the Métis of Western Canada. The Métis Nation homeland extends a little bit in Ontario, so stuff that happens outside the northwest corner of Ontario isn't really our bailiwick. So stories there need to be told by the people that are from there. It'd be like us, say Cree in Saskatchewan, trying to represent Cree in northwest Quebec on James Bay. There's some commonality there, but that belongs to James Bay people. So we try to just focus on our homeland here, where our stories come from, and hopefully people who are originally from that homeland can reconnect. So that is our emphasis. But I mean, we have to do so in a respectful manner and realize that because of colonization, people are ripped up and moved around all over the continent. One of the people I connected with a long time ago lives in Baltimore, Maryland, and he's a kinsman of Madeleine Dumont. And we were able to work together to find the oldest known photograph of Gabriel Dumont just after he was married, and an image of Madeleine. And he was a result of the diaspora, or his sister was, I forget the connection, but there was someone who was lost to the Métis Nation who came back and helped us find something that was very precious to the Métis Nation. Turns out this old photograph of Gabriel Dumont and his wife Madeleine, when they were newlyweds, was in there were all sorts of petit Canadas in New England where French Canadians lived. And it was in Rhode Island at a university that this image was lost to history. But he worked with this institution and we repatriated back to the Métis Nation in Western Canada. So that's an example of someone who was lost to the Métis Nation coming back and finding his way and delivering a great gift back to the Métis Nation.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it really does. And I'm not nitpicking here. I'm a great admirer of the project you've been undertaking.
Thank you. Merci.
Perhaps if I might, the small press movement did a lot to, in terms of connections between culture and for instance, among publishers who publish in French in Quebec and publishers who publish in English in Canada, and we've been getting for the past 20 years much more translations than there were before. And in the case of quite a few Indigenous projects, Sylvain illustrated that sometimes they're presided over by an institution. The Gabriel Dumont Institute is a good example of that. And I guess one of the issues with a cultural artifact or art piece, like a comic book, is how do you even know about it? There's the we're stuck in a culture of Marvel Comics universe, and you can go on the street and ask about anybody on the street, and they'll know about Captain America. So the rouleau compresseur, what's the word for that in English? Those big machines that make the asphalt flat.
Steamroller.
Steamroller, thank you. Yeah, thanks. So there's the steamroller of American culture, and then relatively less important, but still steamrollers of French Canadian culture and English Canadian culture. How can Indigenous cultures be discovered and become find a public? So if any of the three, if maybe there's no easy answer, or people in the public, if.
Well, if I may, I've seen I've interviewed a few editors and publishers, and what they do is that they use the tools of the colonizer. So like Amazon is a great tool, and it's kind of open to anybody. So Jason English Speaker, for example, like as I said before, sold over 100,000 copies of his graphic novel on education on the residential schools, and all that through Amazon. So if you look for Indigenous graphic novels, because Amazon is so big, if you do a search through Google, you'll end up on the Amazon website. So it's a way to kind of using Google, like using Google search to lead people to what you're doing. I think you'll see more and more initiative like this, because it's a cheap start in a sense. You can publish whatever you want for free on Amazon. It allows people to discover what you're doing, because you're using the giant's body. So there's a giant walking in a plane, everybody sees a giant, but if you on the giant, then people will see you as well. But maybe Darren will have additional strategies on how
Yes.
he yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. There's a number of things involved with marketing your books. One thing I should mention, there is a good Aboriginal Indigenous distributor in Canada called goodminds.com, and they have raised the profile of Indigenous books throughout the country, and they do a good job marketing them. So you're not beholden to Amazon or Chapters, Indigo, if you don't want to go there. Also, a lot of good independent bookstores love to carry Indigenous graphic novels, such as Turning the Tide in Saskatoon. But every city worth its salt still has an independent bookstore that does that. We do market through Amazon, and we do get a good business from them, but it does cut into our profit margins. Not that we sell to make money, but we like to put the money back into our publishing program to produce more resources. We have an e-commerce site, and that does very well, particularly during the pandemic. But our biggest audience is twofold: educators across Canada, sometimes the United States. Teachers love our resources and buy them. School boards love them. Year end comes, we get big orders going to the several thousands of dollars through school boards throughout Canada, but mainly Ontario West, and Métis organizations across the Métis homeland. So Métis Nation Ontario all the way to Métis Nation British Columbia buy a lot of our resources. And those are our two biggest customers. But we also work with the Sask Books to market our books, and they go to a lot of events we don't reach. Believe it or not, they go put an insert in the Western Producer, which is a farmer's newspaper in Western Canada, and the catalog insert they put in there does a lot of sales for our resources. So go figure. Farmers like to read about Indigenous people too when they have the opportunity. So that does well. But it's mainly our work with teachers and with the Métis community where our sales come from, and we hold a lot of workshops. Before the pandemic, we'd have 3 or 4 workshops a year where we invite educators to our offices in Saskatoon, but sometimes in Prince Albert or Regina, and we'd have an educator explain our resources and share the curriculum. And the books would be put in a big box of, I don't know, 30 books there, and we'd sell them for $250 plus the lesson plans. And educators just loved that. They like to have a one-stop shopping, and they like to have the complete package. So that's done well for us. But you have to recognize people buy books for different reasons. So Métis community people do it for cultural preservation because of the Michif component. Educators to learn something about the Métis. And then there's other people who just like a good story, regardless of whether it's about Métis, Chinese, Canadian, you know, Quebecois, whatever the story is about, Mi'kmaq, they just like a good story. So we reach those people as well. So we have a number of different strategies to reach people, but we've been fairly successful. Our sales are generally anywhere between 175 and 250,000 a year. And our books, our popular children's books, for instance, go to 2 or 3 printings of 2,000 a piece. So our books do very well, but it's mainly thanks to Métis community people, Métis political bodies and educators that we've sold so much. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah, it's both answers. Another question. We have time perhaps for a last question. Well, if not, I'd like to thank our 3 speakers. We have a 30-minute break, I believe. And there will be 2 sessions starting at 1:30 Mountain Time. So a bit of time for changing posture a bit and moving our bodies, and back for more in just a moment. Bonjour tout le monde.
Thank you.
Merci encore aux 3 panélistes.